This is Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Wrestling Nostalgia. I am your host, Dave Dynasty. Thank you for joining us, and we have a great episode for you this week. I am being joined once again by our friend Richard Vicek, the author of the BRUISER biography, and he's come back on to continue on our history of the WWA series. And on this episode, we will be covering 1970 to 1973. And I mentioned it as we start off the talk with me and Richard, but if you go back in the archives to episode 70 of the podcast, you can listen to part 1, which covered the history of the WWA from 1964 in the inception to 1969. So go back and listen to that if you haven't already. Catch up on that part, and then here you go, jump in today on this episode and listen to 1970 to 1973. This will be an ongoing series that will carry on until we cover the complete history of the WWA. And it's a fun thing. One of my projects from the get-go that I've always wanted to do, and that, I decided it was time to pick back up. And thank you to Richard for joining me for that discussion today. Lots of great stuff. I think you guys will love it. I don't have a lot here at the top. I've decided to drop my thing where I go through all these dates and things, because I think it's kind of dry and boring. I don't think anybody tunes in to listen to that. But if you want to see those things and know those things, you need to follow me on social media, because I will continue to post those things there. Important title changes, birthdays, wrestling events, different things like that. I'm going to save all that kind of content exclusively on all my social media platforms. So make sure you follow us on those. You can follow the podcast itself on X, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Just look up Wrestle Nostalgia. That's RASSLE Nostalgia, all one word. Or you can follow me personally on X at The Dave Dynasty. And if you follow those, you will see all that content, the historical dates and stuff that I was rambling on through here, and I just thought I thought it was kind of boring content. So I'm moving it all strictly to social media. So thank you for that. But that's all I got, right? There's nothing really for me that I want to key on or touch on prior to this. I'm excited for you to hear this talk with me and Richard. I'm excited to dive into the history of the WWA, as you all know, my favorite area to talk about. So let's take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll be joined by Richard, and we'll get right into it. If you like horror movies, be sure to check out Dave Dynasty and Ike Isaacs on the Listen to Their Screams Horror Podcast. It is available on all podcast platforms and on social media at Listen to Screams. That is Listen, the number 2, and Screams. All right, and we're back on Wrestling Nostalgia, and I'm being joined by Richard Vicek. And if you guys remember back in the archives, way back in episode 70, Richard joined me, and we did an episode on the history of the WWA from 1964 to 1969. And on this episode, we're picking up where that left off, and we're doing a history of the WWA from 1970 to 1973. But first of all, Richard, how are you doing?
Hey, very good. It's great to be here. And I always like sharing the history of the WWA.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And, I'm sorry, before we dive into 1970, why don't you, Richard, just recap a little bit that 64 to 69, the start of the WWA, Sure.
Just for anybody that needs to be brought back up to speed. Why don't you kind of recap for them?
Sure. Well, Dick the Bruiser, William Franklin Atlas, and Wilbur Snyder were wrestling in all over the country from the mid-1950s to 1963. Their paths crossed many times, especially in Chicago, Indianapolis, and Detroit. And in 1964, they decided to start their own promotion against the established promoter, Jim Barnett. So with the help of Bruiser's high school classmate, Chuck Marlowe, on Channel 4 TV, that's where their television ran. And they used the North Side and South Side Armories, and sometimes the Fairgrounds Coliseum. And throughout the 60s, that promotion steadily grew and prospered. And during that time, too, Snyder and Bruiser entered into an arrangement with Vern Gagne to co-promote the International Amphitheater in Chicago with the help of Robert Arden Luce, also known as promoter Bob Luce fans.
Yeah, there's often that misnomer that that Bruiser and Snyder bought the territory from Barnett, and they did not. They went opposition and essentially kind of took over and ran Barnett out.
Well, some of the direct evidence to that, I only really realized that from looking at microfilm.
Yeah.
Where they were scheduling for at least August and September of 1964. Both of them put on shows.
Yep.
In the same 6-week period or so. And I learned the whole story in research for the Bruiser book, talking to William Estes, a Texas attorney, the son of Bach, who gave me the whole lowdown on this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So No, I'm just saying obviously, because the WWA is one of those territories that there hadn't been near as much research and material out there. So I don't know if it's just people just assumed there was the lineage there, but now in this day and age, it's so much easier to go through the newspaper archives and see all this stuff. And like you said, you talked to virtually everybody associated with the territory that was still alive when you did your book. So and that was kind of, that's really, to my knowledge, you were the first person to really dive that deep and talk to that many people. Yeah,
and I remember one of your guests on your show, Mike Snyder, filled me in on a lot of that. I think he used the term Bruiser and Snyder built a better mousetrap.
Yeah. With Dick the Bruiser on top and Snyder on top, there was no why did they need Barnett? Honestly, no. They could just do what they want. They were huge stars at that time, coming out of the 50s. So
yes.
And all right. No,
so
go ahead.
Anyway, I'm not going to sit here and recite matches, or cards and stuff, but I'm just going to sort of talk who were the major players during these years.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. For instance, the big arrival in late 1969 was a former University of Nebraska wrestler and an AWA trained wrestler named James Raschke. In real life, Raschke was a quiet and shy guy, but he developed into a memorable character. I remember the story Mad Dog Vachon said to him, "Hey, you'd be a good German." And he says, "I am German." Anyway, he became known as Baron von Raschke, the German master of the Iron Claw. And he really took this territory by storm. And, of course, he feuded with Wilbur and then Dick before winning the WWA title and holding it for over 18 months. That's a similar situation several years before that with Blackjack Lanza. So that says how much Bruiser and Snyder had faith in Raschke to portray that role and be a believable villain.
Yeah.
And of course, who was his manager during most of those times?
Well, of course, you the one and only, the greatest of all time.
Yes. So, what a combination there.
Yeah, Bobby Heenan.
So then as 1970 and 71 rolled in, there was always in the WWA a new group of wrestlers that would come in, because after a year, 18 months, people got tired of the same matchups. And during this period, a lot of these wrestlers came from the Detroit territory of the Sheik. But they had, WWA had Louis Martinez, who then used an Apache Indian gimmick. Apache Louie. There was the Fabulous Kangaroos, the version that consisted of Al Costello and Don Kent, and managed by Crybaby George Cannon. The Mighty Igor came on board, managed by Ivan Kalmikov, and they would do those feats of strength type things before matches.
Yeah.
But I never figured out how they would take the cinder block, put a towel on Igor's head, a cinder block, and Ivan smashes it with a sledgehammer. I have no idea, but anyway.
Yeah.
But anyway, Hans Schmidt came in as a partner with the Baron. Wrestling veteran Doug Gilbert came in under a mask called the Professor. And there was even a short visit again from Don Fargo. This time he brought his younger brother, Johnny Fargo, who we would all later know as Greg the Hammer Valentine.
Mm-hmm.
Another significant player in those years was Paul Christie, who finally achieved main event status. In fact, he won the WWA tag title with Wilbur during those years. So that new talent always helped to spice things up and create storylines, that kept interest.
Yeah, Bruiser, people always knock Bruiser and say that he always booked himself strong, always booked himself on top. And if people really look, that's not really, he was strong, but Bruiser knew the value in the chase. And he always had, he always had these top heels, like you mentioned that, Blackjack Lanza, then Baron von Raschke, and then others on. He knew the where the money was in dropping the belt and chasing it back, mm-hmm. and how, the big match to get it back, and how to, milk a feud with a heel for several months, several shows.
Yeah.
And, so, you can look at it on paper and, he held the title however many times. Yeah, but that means he was dropping it too. He knew,
yes,
he knew the value in that babyface Bruiser chasing the big heel.
Mm-hmm. For sure. A big development in 1971. Well, Chuck Marlowe became too busy with his wrestling duties. He did the sports on the 11 o'clock news on Channel 4.
Yeah.
He worked Indiana University basketball, mm-hmm. on television. He was always, I remember as a kid, listening to the Indianapolis 500 radio broadcasts. And he would be one of they'd have 4 reporters around the track, whatever, turn 2 or turn number 4. He was always on that. And I was like, the first time I heard that, I said, oh, wow, that's Chuck Marlowe. Because you could listen on radio in real time, but then there'd be an edited tape later that night with the actual on television.
Yeah.
But anyway, Marlowe was replaced by Sam Menaker, who had prior experience with both Bruiser and Snyder. Sam was the TV announcer in Windsor, Ontario in 1959 when Bruiser's career took off in Detroit. And Sam was a promoter in El Paso, Texas in 1954 who brought in a young California sensation, Wilbur Snyder. So both of them had positive experiences with Sam. And of course, he called the television bouts, conducted the fake locker room interviews, and he did various office duties for the company, like manage spot shows, collect money, and that kind of stuff. Sometimes they'd put him in a referee, and he had a great feud with Bobby Heenan several times. Chicago, Fort Wayne, and it was a perfectly executed rivalry, I thought.
Yeah. Sam was, like you said, Sam was prominent and a very important part up to the, the early '80s, the very early '80s. He was the face. He was the guy you saw on TV, calling everything, doing the ringside interviews, everything. The locker room, like you said, and but yeah, he was a very prominent figure with the WWA during the '70s.
Yeah. And also that year, in the world of tag teams, this was the biggest development in the entire history of the WWA, in my humble opinion.
Yep.
This is when the team of Bob Windham and Jack Lanza were brought together. And that's Blackjack Lanza and Blackjack Mulligan. You know, Mulligan was a former New York Jet football player, a former referee in the AWA, and he was a challenger to Pedro Morales for the WWF Championship. In fact, he was stabbed by a fan in the Boston Garden before a match. I mean, it was like scores of stitches. I understand it was like a horrible incident. And of course, John Lanza became the first cowboy Jack Lanza, but switched to Blackjack Lanza in the late 60s in the WWA, managed by Heenan, and served as a pretty long-standing WWA champion. Well, they were brought together by Bruiser and Snyder, and they became one of the top teams ever in the WWA. They were big, mean, charismatic, and rough. And of course, they had the big feuds with the Bruiser and Crusher. I remember a lot of the TV interviews. Heenan would stand and talk, you know, Menaker would put the microphone in front of him, and Lanza and Mulligan would just stand there with their 10-gallon hats, their big mustaches, their vests, sneering at the camera while Heenan worked the crowd. So that was, and of course they feuded in the Indy Expo Center, which, by the way, I mentioned the Expo Center, but that eventually became the home of the WWA in 1972, where those cards had both TV squash matches, you know, in a 9,000 seat arena, and non-TV main events, or they had main events where time ran out. You know, right when Crusher was going to get his hands on Heenan, Heenan flips over to the ropes to the floor, and Sam Menaker told us, "Oh, I'm sorry, fans. See you next week on All-Star Championship Wrestling." They had, of course, they were the headliners at the big card September 1st, 1972 at Soldier Field. And at around the same time they did the shows at the Expo Center, they started broadcasting and running their tape on a different station, on WRTV Channel 6, which was an NBC affiliate. And that station had a much stronger broadcast signal in Indianapolis. You know, the previous station, Channel 4, WTTV, that was in Bloomington. And I remember Bobby Heenan once saying on an interview that some north side parts of Indy couldn't even pick up the signal. Oh. So that was, of course, you know, they had the newspaper ads. But yeah, that was a big thing. And then again, that WRTV Channel 6 was eventually in the early 70s put on cable. So I could see that show while living 50 miles up the road in Lafayette, Indiana. And of course, they ran those tapes in Fort Wayne and Elkhart and Terre Haute, places like that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, the Blackjacks, there's a handful, a very small handful of things that when you think WWA, they're really noted for. And the Blackjacks are one of them, right? I mean, that was... Go ahead.
So Bruiser and Snyder put them together, and look how, you know, they left. They go to the WWF, you know, and hold those belts. But it all started I don't know if Bruiser sent Vince Sr. a tape or somebody.
Yeah.
But you see some of those clips on YouTube. You could see how the crowd's into it.
Yeah.
You probably remember that match. It was Bruiser, Crusher, and Little Bruiser.
Yeah.
The midget against Lance Mulligan and Heenan, and how that crowd it's thunderous pandemonium during that.
Yep. They were dying for Little Bruiser to get his hands on Bobby.
And he did.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Right after shaking hands.
Yeah.
And Heenan tries to be his typical smart aleck. He gets down on both knees.
Yeah.
And offers the handshake Little Bruiser, and Little Bruiser drop kicks him in the chest.
Yep. Yeah. And the Blackjack, I mean, they had a dominant run there with the tag titles. I held them, over a year there during the early part of this time period, because they were, like I said, they were the perfect adversaries there for Bruiser and Crusher, and of course with Heenan, and it was just it was the epitome of 70s wrestling. It was it was perfect.
And coincidentally, with that arrival of the Blackjacks, in that year, Bruiser and Snyder decided to expand their territory to Olympia Stadium in Detroit, Michigan, which was then controlled by the original Sheik. Bruiser had a lot of, I remember his first run in Detroit starting in 1959 till around 1961. He was the main event in 38 out of 40 cards, which were controlled by Jim Barnett. And I would think he thought, something, maybe I could rekindle that enthusiasm. So they decided to challenge big time wrestling and go face to face for the market share in Detroit. And luckily for Bruiser at the time, his lawsuits over the Alex Kiris brawl in 1963 were settled and paid off. And the theory is, well, he couldn't wrestle up there because some lawyer would put an attachment on his payoff. But see, once those lawsuits were settled, he was able to go out there.
Yeah.
And the original Sheik didn't just sit by and say, okay, Bruiser, good luck to you. But the Sheik originally, and kept doing this, he booked his cards at the Cobo Arena on the same night as Bruiser did at the Olympia. This was sort of a rival, a strong rivalry. The Sheik at the time was a member of the National Wrestling Alliance, and other NWA people sent in talent to boost the Cobo cards. I remember on that first card, they had Gorilla Monsoon. I mean, I don't remember all the, but every existing NWA territory sends somebody in to come to the rescue. In fact, and of course, this met the attention of NWA President Sam Muchnick, who told Bruiser, well, Dick, as much as I admire you, I'm not going to be able to use you or your WWA people in St. Louis until you stop co-promoting, you and Wilbur running against the Sheik. That's going to have to stop. Yeah. And it eventually did. And after about 2.5 years, the WWA packed their bags and went home to Indianapolis. And later, Sheik and Bruiser made up and each wrestled on each other's cards in Detroit, Chicago, Indianapolis, and Fort Wayne. So that was that was one of the longest rival competitions in wrestling in the territory days.
Yeah. And it was wild because both of them were drawing pretty well. running on the same nights. It's pretty crazy how many fans were watching wrestling in Detroit on those nights.
I remember some of the Detroit photographers said something to the effect, "Oh, this was tough. I wanted to see both of those cards, but I only could go to one."
Yep. Yeah. The fans got caught up in it.
And this, and of course, in 1972 was the best year ever in the WWA for both attendance, revenues, and profits, and a crowd of 10,000 fans at the Expo Center was standard in Indianapolis, including turnaway crowds. And there were some new interesting people that came on board a tag team called the Graduates, which were Angelo Poffo and Ken Dillinger. And they were managed by Mark Manson, who was a Charles Manson lookalike.
Yep.
And of course, he put together the team of Billy Red Cloud, who was a legitimate Native American, and Chief Bobby Bald Eagle, who wasn't a legitimate Native American. But they were, sometimes in main events in the spot shows. And of course, he had Bruiser and Snyder had mainstays in that lineup, including Bill Miller, Moose Cholak, Art Thomas, Prince Pullins, and the Crusher. And eventually, more people came in. Pepper Gomez, Cowboy Bob Ellis. He really brought in some quality people.
Yeah.
Experienced people that knew the drill.
Yeah, there's a lot of great talent there. A lot of underappreciated talent. Bob Ellis is always one that always kills me how underappreciated he is.
Yes.
And I always every year I know it's not the be all end all, but in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, their Hall of Fame, I cannot believe Bob Ellis is not in there yet. And every year I'm always trying to encourage people to vote Bob Ellis in because it just boggles my mind.
And it's harder. It's harder because as the decades go by, I'm aware of wrestling fans my age, that have passed away in the last 5 years. You've had wrestling people, guests on your show that are no longer with us.
Yep.
And the more that happens, the less people remember Cowboy Bob Ellis or Pepper Gomez.
Yep. All of them. Yeah. Art Thomas, all these guys. Art Thomas is in Prince Paul's, all those guys. You don't hear those names. Yeah. Right? People don't ever mention those names. And man, they were so talented.
Hey, Art Thomas main evented in New York against Buddy Rogers in the day.
Yep.
Yep.
So, well, that's why we do things like this. We're trying to keep those memories alive.
Yeah. Well, in late '92, another really big name arrived on the scene. Ernie the King Ladd was brought in, an ex-American Football League all-star defensive lineman. He was the self-proclaimed king of wrestling, 6'9", over 300 pounds. And he was one of the best ex-AFL converts from football to wrestling. And of course, one of Bruiser's most formidable opponents during these years was none other than Ernie Ladd, two football greats meeting head on. I always remember, and I used to get the biggest laugh. Ernie Ladd would go to the ring. He would step over the top rope. He was so big. And he'd have his right thumb taped with adhesive tape. And the referee, at the instructions would, try to touch it. And he'd pull back out. And then Menaker, we hear that Ladd still has that football injury. and of course, he would use that thumb as a weapon, to hide it from the referee. It would work every time, even though no matter what town he'd go to, how many weeks into his run. And then the other gimmick was he would tell the ring announcer, I demand silence from the audience when I take off my crown. So he slowly puts his hand up to the crown. The crowd goes nuts, screaming. It worked. These little vaudeville or comedic little gags worked real good back in those days.
Yeah. They were these guys knew how to work the crowd, how to get the heat, how to milk it.
Yeah. And of course, he was a tag partner with Baron von Raschke, managed by Heenan. In fact, there's an amazing YouTube clip from August 1973. They only show the first two falls of a tag match where, it's Baron and Ladd, managed by Heenan, against Bruiser and Bruno Sammartino. The referee is Sam Menaker. And the ring announcer, Tom Mathis, who was an Indianapolis DJ, actually calls the match. That was to me, that was the only time Sam Menaker didn't call the match. But yeah, he was refereeing at the time.
Yeah.
And you just see how the like I said, the thunderous boos. Heenan, steps to the center of the ring when his name is mentioned, throws both arms in the air. Those were the days,
Yeah. I mean,
and
he was
of course,
heat magnet.
Yeah, and of course, hey, Ladd was big in the LA territory, in Houston, in Georgia, in the Carolinas, at the WWE. He was in Detroit. He wrestled just about every territory.
Yeah.
And all right, another way he used to work the crowd, there is the clipping from Georgia Championship Wrestling. Him and Jay Strongbow, where he destroyed Jay Strongbow's Indian regalia.
Yeah. Yeah. Ernie was around for a long time. I think his knees just kind of gave out, and he really couldn't anymore. But I know he even booked a few places and everything else. He had a good mind.
Yeah, he did. And of course, I'm sure because Indianapolis, that territory, Bruiser could only really give him good payoffs in Chicago or Indianapolis, maybe halfway decent in Fort Wayne. It wasn't. In fact, he didn't work the spot shows. They just used them for the big shows.
Yeah.
And but anyway, that was a significant contribution when he came to the WWA, I thought, for sure.
Yeah.
And around the same year, in 73, the famous team of the Valiant brothers were put together. And of course, Handsome Jimmy arrived a few years earlier as James Vallon, a muscular babyface. He grew up in the Northwest Indiana and was very aware of Dick the Bruiser and Wilbur Snyder. And Handsome Jimmy eventually turned heel and became a regular WWA villain managed by Heenan. He used to have these speckled jackets. I remember one on the back, it said, "I am a star." And then talk about fate, or when you cross paths with someone unexpectedly. In 1973, Heenan, Baron, and Valiant were in Ontario working a spot show. And Heenan saw a muscular blonde wrestler on the card named John L. Sullivan, who was a protege of Bruno Sammartino. And so I think it was Heenan and Valiant had the idea, hey, Sullivan can become a Valiant brother.
Mm-hmm.
And he became Luscious Johnny Valiant, so the team was born. And they wore those colorful jackets and funny trunks. They used this gimmick in the ring, which has been called pull the switch. Let's say Valiant is covering, Jimmy is covering an opponent, and the referee's back is turned, and Jimmy's been in the ring for 5 minutes. Then they switch places real quick without tagging off, and they look similar, blonde hair, the same trunks, and they would win a lot of matches doing that rotation routine. And of course, it ends with them winning and the baby faces arguing with the referee. It worked every time. And of course, they became WWA tag team title holders from taking them from Gomez and Snyder. And then they feuded with Bruiser and Bruno. And this was the time between when Bruno, between his two stints as WWF Heavyweight Championship, which is probably good for him to do this, because he would only maybe work at the most 2 times a week, either Chicago, Indianapolis, or Fort Wayne. And Detroit, they were still running Detroit at the time, as opposed to the days when he was doing 5 and 6 nights a week in that Northwest corridor, all those cities like Boston, Hartford, New York, Albany, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, all that. So that was a nice time for him, I'm sure, getting a break from the stress. And of course, the Valiants continued. Eventually, they lost the WWA titles. And of course, they went on to be, just like the Blackjacks, WWF heavyweight title holders. And of course, they went to the San Francisco territory, ran it by storm. They were into the AWA. They went to Georgia, and they even came back to the WWA. We'll talk a bit that later, maybe 1977-ish, under the management of Major Duke George.
Yeah.
But what I just described to you was the best lineup and the biggest heat and the most exciting feud. And I tell you, those are the days for the WWA. On the next program, we'll be getting into the people that tried to fill that vacuum left by the departures of the Blackjacks and Ernie Ladd and the Valiant brothers. We'll learn about Ox Baker and the Legionnaires and Handsome Johnny Starr. Of course, when we start the next chapter, one of the big blows to the WWA will be the departure of Bobby Heenan.
Yep. I was going to say that. Yeah.
That was.
Yeah, when you speaking of, when you mentioned Johnny Starr, he was the guy that tried to fill the shoes, and it's a little unfair because Johnny Starr is a talented guy in his own right.
Oh yeah, but you're Bruiser, you're trying to replace someone that's universally recognized as the greatest performer in and out of the ring in the history of the industry.
Yeah.
In Raymond Lewis Heenan.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, go. It's okay.
No, I was just going to mention, on the Valiants again. We talked earlier about the Blackjacks being probably what we call probably the greatest creation in the WWA. But I'd put the Valiants slot them right in at number 2, probably. Yeah. In my eyes. Yeah. Yeah, no. Yeah, that's why I think it's often unheralded the impact the WWA had. I mean, when you have, the creation of the Blackjacks, the creation of the Valiants, some of these other guys that, got time to shine and everything else. And, there needs to be a
And
little more credit there.
and two exceptional contributions of the WWA is they're the ones that gave Bobby Heenan his first manager job,
Yep.
which he held for a good 6.5 to 7 years off and on during that time. And also later in the story, they will hire David McLean,
Mm-hmm.
who up to that time was a ringside photographer. I remember buying pictures from him at the Hammond Civic Center. He had, a notebook with plastic sleeves and pictures.
Yep.
And it was amazing, and then to my surprise, 5 years later, he's filling in and replacing Sam Mineker.
Yep.
And he's had, let's see, he started in the late 80s. I think his first of, I count them, 4 women wrestling shows or promotions.
Yeah, he got one now, I think. Women of Wrestling, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
Something like that. He's got one currently. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, there's a lot going on there. And a lot to talk about still coming up in the future. But like you said, these are kind of the peak years. There's still, as we get to the mid and late, there's still some really good years left. And then it starts to decline.
Yeah.
And then the 80s are a little rough time. Again, yes, I do believe there's a little accountability on BRUISER with that a little bit, but it was also just a reflection of the time, right? The territories were drying up and dying.
Mm-hmm.
And, between cable TV and Vince McMahon and all kinds of other things. And
yeah.
it was just a product of the time.
In the early 80s, all right, I was back in Chicago now, but the Indianapolis wrestling program was still shown on Channel 44. But on my cable, every Saturday night at 11 p.m., the WWF TV originating from Secaucus, New Jersey, ran on television in Chicago.
Yep.
And then also Saturday afternoon, Georgia Championship Wrestling.
Yep.
And they had the feud between Tommy Wildfire Rich and Buzz Sawyer. They had feud of the Freebirds against the Junkyard Dog and Ted DiBiase.
Yep.
And the they were WWF by then. Backlund was the champion, feuding with Morocco and Valentine and Orton.
Yep.
All these people, Mosca. It was, and then okay, they looked just so, those two promotions were just so much more lively, interesting and realistic than the WWA.
Yeah.
I hated to say that, but
yeah, we'll dive more into that then when we get later into that time. But yeah, that's true. But like we said, we still got the next installment. There's still a few more really good prime years to talk about. A lot of good talent to come around. I mean,
yeah,
people don't know. People very much forget the WWA was powerful in the 70s. They were right up there as often being considered in the top 3 or 4 promotions in the country, and hands down. I mean, they were, like you said, drawing 10,000 a show, and everything else. They were a great promotion through the 70s.
Right.
So
sounds good.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Richard, for coming on. Before we let you go for this installment, why don't you mentioned it earlier, but why don't you once again plug your book? Because anybody that's interested, particularly in just wrestling history in general, but particularly WWA and Midwest wrestling, will want to check out your book if they haven't already.
Yes. It's BRUISER, the world's most dangerous wrestler, published by Crowbar Press. a Kindle version of this book is available on Amazon
There
too,
you go.
if you don't want a paper book.
Yeah.
And there's another project in the works, that's being reviewed by a publisher, and maybe down the line I could talk on your show about that.
Yeah, that'd be exciting. Yeah, I can't wait. So yeah, we'll keep in touch with that. And like I said, I'll put a link in the show notes for anybody who wants to grab that book. A link to the Crowbar Press page for it. And like I said, I advise everybody. Yeah, I mean, you don't even have to be necessarily a WWA fan. Dick the Bruiser was one of the biggest personalities in wrestling history, period. So there's something to enjoy there for everybody who likes wrestling. So, but all right, Richard, thanks for joining us for this one, and we'll have you back on in the near future to continue on.
Dave.
Ladies and gentlemen, Wrestling Fans International Association is back. That's right, the premier fan club association of the 1970s and 1980s has been revived and is back in business. Join today. It's free at thewfia.org. That's thewfia.org. You can also join us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/WFIA 1969.
All right, and welcome back to Wrestling Nostalgia. I'm Dave Dynasty. Thank you to Richard Vicek for coming on and discussing the history of the WWA from 1970, 1973. Like I said earlier, watch future episodes where we continue on that talk through the history of the promotion. Make sure you subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform that you use. And if the option is there to give us a rating and review, please do that, because that helps us in those algorithms that where people are listening to other wrestling podcasts and we come up as a suggested listen. Make sure you follow us on social media. We're on X, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Just look up Wrestling Nostalgia, and you can find me personally on X at the Dave Dynasty. And probably the best way that you can support the show is to buy a shirt. We have several out there. Go to ProWrestlingTees.com/the Dave Dynasty and purchase one today. Thank you again for joining me. Thank you for all your support, all your feedback online, on social media, all the networking and sharing and everything that you guys give me. I really do appreciate it. We continue to grow, and that's a good thing, right? Because we're putting a spotlight on some history of some promotions and some guys that maybe don't get enough, and I'm happy that it's working, right? People are out there and liking it and enjoying it. So thank you for that. We'll have another episode in 2 weeks. And until then, wherever you go and whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.